I began to really be interested in her work because I thought beneath all of the gruesomeness and grotesqueness, there was a wonderful Catholic message in there of redemption in almost every single story that I read. And I was really captivated by her.
She was a storyteller who wrote with this belief that every story hinges on the action of grace in a character's life.
Welcome to Matters of Soul Importance, where we dive deeply into topics of both earthly and eternal consequence. I'm Roxanne Solonen, faith columnist and features writer for the Forum, author, and speaker. My guests today, Karen Mahoney and Christina Brajkovich, are not just fellow writers, but writing friends with whom I traveled to Milledgeville, Georgia to visit the hometown of Southern fiction writer Flannery O'Connor in the summer of 2014, on the 50th anniversary of her death at 39 years old of lupus. Why did we take this trip? It was really an adventure to demystify the woman we'd heard so much about, in part through a Catholic writers group we'd been conversing with for years over email. At one point in the conversation with other writers throughout the United States, it was proposed that we should organize a literary trip to Flannery O'Connor's home and find out for ourselves why this writer has been so beloved and yet so controversial at the same time. Toward the end of this trip, we were inspired to write about our experiences. 3 writers from the North who had experienced the South through visiting our heroine's hometown in the antebellum or pre-Civil War capital of Georgia. What we learned about Flannery and also about ourselves is the topic of a brand new travel memoir that will come out the day this podcast drops, Finding Flannery. I already know a few things about my guests today, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves to help you become acquainted with them. And then we'll dive into the topic of the day. Who was Flannery O'Connor? If you know anything about her, it's probably this, that she loved peacocks. But there's so much more to say about this incredible woman whose suffering brought her exceedingly close to God. I can't wait to share these lovely women with you and introduce Flannery to you as well through their hearts and minds. So let's jump right in.
Well, welcome, Karen and Christina, to Matters of Soul Importance. How are you doing this morning? You can each, Karen, start with you.
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. How about you, Christina?
Yes, thank you. It's good to be here, Roxanne and Karen.
Both of my guests this morning are from Wisconsin, so they're in different locations. But I can't believe this day has finally come. We've been working on this project together for 11 years. So there's a lesson there in perseverance, for one thing. But before we jump into Flannery, the book, and our adventure, let's let our listeners get to know you two a little bit. So again, let's start with Karen. And why don't you just tell just a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a wife. I'm a mom of 5 adult children, grandmother to 15. I've been writing for more than 30 years for Catholic and secular publications. I contributed a couple of chapters to Catholic School Treasury by Ignatius. And when I'm not writing, you can probably find me teaching piano, sewing, or gardening.
Nice. I love your flower pictures on Facebook, so keep those coming. And what about you, Christina?
Yes, I'm going to rewind a little bit. I was 27 years old, to be exact, when I met the two of you in person for this literary pilgrimage to Flannery O'Connor's home. And so at the time, I was working as a freelance writer and writing for a community magazine company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But I was also seeking opportunities to travel and explore and find community with other creative writers and artists like me. So back then I was a free bird. Times have changed a lot since then. I went through a sea of changes since writing this book. So now I am settled down in my nest and married and have 4 young children, and I'm homeschooling them. So times have changed a lot.
We want to go kind of rewind because there's so much here. And I know, first of all, a lot of people don't even know who Flannery O'Connor is, even in the Catholic world. So we want to introduce Flannery, but we also want to, why did we go and visit her hometown? What was the draw? And then we'll talk about who she was. But first of all, so I'll just explain that. So we were on this Catholic writers email list. This was before social media really had taken off. And Flannery just kept coming up on this list. And I had not really heard of her before and kind of started dipping into some of her writing and was a little bit confused. It was just didn't seem to match this like image of the devout Catholic writer. She had, she was a fiction writer, and her stories were described by many as kind of grotesque, misfit characters, kind of a zany world, but really she had something really beautiful to say. So how did we get on this trip? Christina, you were the one, I think, that proposed the idea to go, and then we clamored aboard as we realized we could. So you start.
Yes, Flannery O'Connor was a role model to me as an aspiring freelance writer. So I first heard of her through a college creative writing course at Franciscan University of Steubenville. So I owe it to that professor for introducing me to Flannery O'Connor and her works. And at the time of my life, when I needed a role model, I needed another Catholic woman writer to really set the course for me. And Flannery O'Connor became an amazing heroine for me. And so I guess I was driven it was on my heart for many years to travel to her home. And I think I was just driven by curiosity. I think a lot of writers are kind of mystified by other writers. Like, how do they do it? And can I do it too? And so I pitched the idea to some of my colleagues from Franciscan University, but the timing was not right. And it was a few years later that I was invited into this online Catholic writers email group that you mentioned, Roxanne. And a discussion about Flannery led to me throwing out some feelers again, like, hey, does anyone want to maybe get together and go on a trip to Georgia, to her home, which is a historic landmark now. So I'll let Karen take it from there because she was one of the members of this group.
Right. And Karen probably read Flannery before either of us did. So Karen, how were you introduced to Flannery? Tell us about that.
I was in sixth grade, and we were assigned to write a short story book report, and I happened to find her book on one of her books on my parents' bookcase, and I started reading. I think it was Everything Rises That Must Converge. I think it was the first one that I read, and I found it really confusing at the time. And I remember my mom saying she thought it was confusing too. So I kind of left it be, and then I started reading her stuff later on, like in high school and everything else. And I began to really be interested in her work because I thought beneath all of the gruesomeness and grotesqueness, there was a wonderful Catholic message in there of redemption in almost every single story that I read. And I was really captivated by her and kind of put her in the back burner for a long time. But then when Christina brought it up in our group, then I was very encouraged about the possibility of going there, even though I thought it was a little bit nutty at first.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to think about things, and we often have these dreams and these thoughts about, oh, we should do that and we should do this. But the actual practical matter of doing it, especially Karen and I, we had a lot going on in our lives at the time. And Christina, you had your own things that might have been holding you back. But what finally prompted it? And I guess, Christina, if you could kind of lay out the itinerary, like how did you, because you kind of had that in hand. How did you go about doing that? And where did we go?
Yeah. Well, it's all about the timing of things. I was reading Flannery O'Connor's works. It was working, trying to build up my writing network myself. And along the way, I discovered another contemporary Catholic writer of her time, Thomas Merton. And I began to read his autobiography, The Seven-Story Mountain. And it occurred to me that his Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky, where he lived and where he wrote his profound spiritual writings, was conveniently en route to Milledgeville from our northern destinations. So I threw it in there, like we could stop at the Abbey of Gethsemane along the way. And then another Trappist monastery, the Monastery of the Holy Spirit. This is in Conyers, Georgia. So on our way back north, on the trip home, this was a place where Flannery O'Connor herself used to retreat to and seek spiritual direction from a Trappist monk there. So I'd say the itinerary began to take on this spiritual nature as we realized like we could incorporate some of these other places along the way. And of course, explore Milledgeville itself deeply, like go to her church, go to the college, Georgia State College and University where she attended, and put this all into the trip to really get an understanding of her better. And I'll also say a priest friend who learned that I admired Flannery at that time recommended I read this book by Paul Elie. It's called The Life You Save May Be Your Own, based on a short story title of Flannery O'Connor's. And it's all about the power of pilgrimage. It's about 4 American writers who were contemporaries of each other in their day, Thomas Merton, Flannery O'Connor, Dorothy Day, and Walker Percy. And this book helped me convince of just the power of pilgrimage, how we're all pilgrims on a faith journey and how that pilgrimage can really change us. So I guess this itinerary just really, it came to life out of this idea of let's make it spiritual, let's make it a writer's trip.
Karen, do you want to explain a little bit about Milledgeville, which I did not know how to say Milledgeville, and I spelled it wrong and I said it wrong, Milledgeville. But anyway, I had never heard of Milledgeville, Georgia. Like, why would you want to go to Milledgeville, Georgia? Why Milledgeville?
Well, that was where she lived most of her life, especially after she developed lupus. She lived on her property called Andalusia at the time. Milledgeville was an absolute disappointment when we drove into that town. I thought it was going to be a really big fancy town and giving homage to Flannery O'Connor, but it was just a little country town in the South. And but it was charming and everybody was very friendly. And it was really nice to be able to walk around the city streets and walk where she probably walked and go to her parish, Sacred Heart. And I don't know, it was just a very joyous time and something I didn't expect, really.
Yeah, and just to back up a little bit, because there's so many little blanks to fill in, but so Karen and Christina both are from Wisconsin. So how it went is they met at a bratwurst shop in Wisconsin. I wasn't sure if I could go, but what happened is my aunt Merle died, and we were at breakfast with her daughter, who's from Kentucky. And, a funeral is kind of like a reunion. You're getting to see these people like that you haven't seen for years. And she said, I would just really love visitors. Like, she said to my mom and I, if you ever think about coming down to Bowling Green, Kentucky, I would love to see you. And that was it. That was the moment where I thought, maybe that's my way in, because I couldn't quite figure out how I was going to justify leaving 5 kids and my husband at this time in my life. There was a lot going on. But if it had to do with family, if there was some reason, and all of a sudden my mom, who enjoyed traveling too, was pulled in to visit my cousin. And so I flew in, and Christina and Karen, we met in Kentucky. We met at an Airbnb, not an Airbnb, but a bed and breakfast called the Cinnamon House. And we had another of our Catholic writers friends who couldn't make the whole journey with us because she had just started a new job, but she kind of welcomed us to the South, really. And so that's kind of how it all went as far as the setup. And then from there, we traveled in Christina's car, and with Karen taking the reins as we were going through rush hour traffic in a storm in Atlanta. I'm really glad, Christina, that you brought up the pilgrimage aspect, because a pilgrimage is much different than a trip, right? We didn't just go on a vacation. There was meaning to it. There was a spirituality to it. There was an intentionality to it all. And so that really made it so much richer and exciting too, because by then I had started reading Flannery's letters, which really helped me dive into Flannery. I wasn't sure about her breakout novel, Wise Blood, but reading her letters, which are compiled in a volume called The Habit of Being, it's her letters throughout her life, her letters to her editors, her letters to her friends, her letters about suffering, her letters about Christianity. That really drew me to her. And so it became much more than just a trip. And then, of course, it became about friendship too, because we had each other to grow through this. And so what were some of anyone either can jump in, like your favorite moments of this journey, maybe the most meaningful ones for each of you?
Well, for me, I really enjoyed a couple of things. I enjoyed going to the Holy Spirit Monastery quite a bit. I enjoyed having an absolute giggling session during grand silence there. That stands out in my mind quite a bit. But I think I really liked the Hill House where the Flannery O'Connor's mother's help was living. And I was touched with all along the walls in the house, they had newspapers lined up that showed pictures of maybe tropical places or places maybe that they wanted to visit. And I thought it just was like a chronicalization of all of their dreams that they wanted to do in their life, because they were all such nice pictures. And then they had cut out ads for clothing and things like that. So I liked that a lot. And the other thing that stood out to me was getting to go into the very upstairs of her home and seeing a lot of the letters that were written to her and some of the little fun things like maybe old little beer cans and things like that that were hidden from the general public. So those were really standout times for me.
Yes, I agree. It was really like a step back in time, and being on the grounds of Andalusia Farm, I would say was the most significant moment for me. It was kind of surreal sitting on her porch, rocking chairs and taking in the view of the dairy farm grounds. Like, this is where she had to surrender to the diagnosis of being of lupus, which she got diagnosed at age 25 with the same disease that had killed her father. And so she was forced to come back to Milledgeville, Georgia, instead of, she was at the height of her kind of writing career, trying to publish her first novel and everything up in the north in New York and Connecticut. But she had to come back here to this humble place. So I think it really helped me see and find beauty and find myself too in surprising places. And it was very powerful to see those odds and ends from her bedroom and her crutches by the bed. These things really took us back in time and place.
So kind of to explain a little bit more about Andalusia, it was a farm that her mom, Regina, it was in the family, and Flannery really lived a pretty cushioned life. She was an only child, went to Catholic schools in the Bible Belt of the South, which was an interesting contradiction too. But she was very kind of sheltered in many ways. And yet she was making her way out into the world. She lived in Iowa, and then she was in New York, really kind of making it big, and kind of her breakthrough was happening there as she was in this literary world. Things were really happening for Flannery. I think the last place she wanted to be was in Milledgeville, Georgia, at a farm called Andalusia, which was a kind of a backup plan for her mom to be able to survive. So that's where she ended up reluctantly. But as many would say now in hindsight, had she not ended up back in Milledgeville, we wouldn't have the richness of her words. Karen, you really ended up taking a liking or tend to have a connection with her mom, who was sort of like this background character, both in her letters and maybe even in some of her fiction, but definitely in our experience. What do you want to share about her mother, Regina?
Well, a lot of the time, her mom was kind of, considered maybe a misfit herself, that she referred to her as Regina or the parent or something, and not always so kind to her. But I really, my heart went out to her because she was still a fairly young mom when she lost her husband to lupus. And then she was faced the reality of her daughter having the same disease and knowing full well that she was going to lose her in a short time. And she knew she'd have to be her full-time caretaker. And she really loved her daughter and she wanted the best for her, but her mothering was rejected. It was considered over the top or insignificant or maybe intrusive. And I think quite often she maybe felt like Flannery's enemy. I've got 2 estranged children, so I really, really appreciated Regina and what she might have felt as she was rejected by Flannery. It's a hard place to live in, and it can be often really, really painful. So I think Regina was misunderstood, as a lot of her estranged parents are.
Yeah. Well, and she had lost her husband. Now she has an only child who's kind of making it something of herself, and now she's got to come home, but she can't help her. Like she's really serving, like she's keeping Flannery alive through her hard labor. I think that was one of the things about being there in person. Like you see all the labor that her in a dairy farm isn't something you can't just pick up and leave. You have to be there pretty much 24/7 all the time. Like you can't not milk the cows, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it was a lot. Any thoughts there for you, Christina, that you picked up on with either Regina or just the dynamics of the farm that became such a colorful thing to us as we experienced it firsthand?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Regina, I think she tried to understand her daughter's, desire to be a writer and her fictional stories. But I think overall, she was kind of like the rest of people who lived around Flannery, who were like, well, this is kind of strange. And how can you write about these things that you've never experienced before? You've been kind of a sheltered girl, and now you're writing about prostitutes and things. And so she was a little bit mind blown away. But then again, her books were being accepted by these publishers in New York. So, and there was a paycheck coming. So she's like, okay. So there was that interesting element. Flannery did say that her mother much preferred Flannery's paintings to her writings, which are much lesser known, but Flannery was a visual artist too. So that's just an interesting fact that we learned more about too in our coming to know Flannery O'Connor better.
You just reminded me of a moment that we were in her church, because we actually stopped in there one day, and then we also experienced Mass in there a different time, and we kind of hung out a little bit afterwards. I don't know if either of you want to share about what happened when we confronted some visitors from the area who wondered what we were doing there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they asked why we were there, and we said we wanted to, visit Andalusia and walk in the footsteps of Flannery O'Connor. And they said, Flannery O'Connor, weren't her writings kind of dark? And so we said yes, but we really liked her work and everything, but they didn't seem to be too encouraged. I'm pretty sure that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the Bible verse about the prophet not being appreciated in your own home?
Yes, definitely.
We probably all have experienced that in one way or another, even our own home, as in our literal home. For example, I think, my family doesn't really read my work. I mean, there's a lot of it. And I think sometimes they'll share something on a text, like a group text, like, hey, I wrote this and I thought you might appreciate it. And maybe someone will put a thumbs up or whatever. Don't get a lot of accolades. It's okay. It is okay. I'm their mother and wife first, and they can read my writing when I die. Right? So anyway, we learned a lot. What are some other takeaways or lessons? And then we can get it into a little bit about writing the book and how that came about. But we want to paint a little bit more of the picture of this place called Milledgeville in Andalusia. There were some peacocks on site. That's one thing. So either of you want to jump in? Maybe Christina?
Yes. I think a very significant event that happened while we were there was an author reading and book signing event on the grounds of her home by two Southern fiction writers, K. Park Hinckley and Charles McNair. And they helped show just the enduring power of literature and the Catholic imagination today as they spoke about Flannery O'Connor and they spoke about their writings. And it brought together a lot of visitors to the grounds that day. And we were part of that event. So it helped put it all in the perspective, too, that she really has left a legacy in American literature. And, us as writers trying to find our place in that too. And what does Flannery O'Connor have to tell us today?
I remember one moment when you guys were in the living room and found the piano. Karen, you're a musician. Tell about the moment that you started plunking out some little melodies on Flannery O'Connor's piano.
I think I was playing a little boogie on there at when I sat down there, and then Christina started playing something, but it was very, very, I don't know. I I can't even describe the word, but it was so meaningful to be able to play on her piano that she played on and her mother probably played on as well. And just to be able to just sit on their furniture and nothing was really, off limits. You were able to go anywhere you wanted. And playing her piano really brought me close to her. Yeah.
I think nowadays you would see do not touch.
Yes.
We went at a time, it was the 50th anniversary after her death. Things were kind of still in the place that they left them. Like we saw, like you were talking, like the old beer cans, and there was different cans of various things that they used, like worm killer and different things that got to tour, like a closet that was leading out to the back and had all sorts of different, and everything was kind of left in its place. Nothing had been really touched that much. So we really got a rare glimpse. I know that it's been a little bit more refined now, and there's probably a few more ropes. So we just felt so privileged. I think we were surprised that it was still in that state of becoming what it is now. Karen or Christina, what about you? Are there any other memories that you want to share about the actual experience of being in Milledgeville or Andalusia?
Mm-hmm. I would just say being part of the culture and the place, to have the slow Southern drawl being spoken around us, to feel the Southern hospitality it's still so vibrant today, people so friendly, and men being gentlemen and ladies being ladies. It was beautiful to see that still play out. That Southern culture. And that was new for us as Northerners, and helped us understand Flannery O'Connor better in her place. And I think place, region, it was very important to O'Connor because she was writing very much about the characters in the South. That was the setting. Those were her characters. And I think that's also very impactful. Just the place how that shapes who we are as people, and traveling to new places can really widen our view, right? It makes the world bigger in a lot of ways. So there was a lot of power to being in that particular place and time.
You're bringing up something to me about travel. We were on a traveling adventure. We call it a travel memoir is how we kind of define our book. Flannery, at the time that she was suffering through lupus, didn't really care much for traveling. It was kind of a heavy thing to have to do. At one point, people were wanting her to go to Lourdes to get healing, and she really kind of snuffed the whole thing. But in the end, she did go. But she was kind of skeptical, I think, about the miracles that are purported there, or whatever. It was an inconvenience. And yet, this was before social media, 50s, 60s, and she came to appreciate the fruits of travel because she was called out into the world at different points to speak at universities and things like that as she was becoming well known, and her writing appreciated very much. So what would happen is she would end up meeting people there, and then she would become their friends, their pen pals. And so they became very dear to her. That was one of the really beautiful things I think about the book, was how she never did marry. Because of her lupus, she was confined, a huge confinement, actually, to kind of almost like one room of this house, ultimately, is, where she died. But she broadened her world through that travel, and really through finding like-minded people that she could discuss things with, the current events and the writing life and all the different things but she cherished those friendships so much. So I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on that aspect of Flannery, but I know that travel, it became a necessary thing for her to meet the people that then she would welcome into her smaller worlds.
I think it was painful for her to travel. I know she enjoyed being at Yaddo in New York when she was studying her writing there, but and that ended up being so short-lived. And I think just the pain of traveling and the encumbrances of her crutches and everything seemed to be maybe one of the contributing factors as to why she was uncomfortable traveling. But you brought up a really good point about her meeting different people along the way when she was called out to speak. And that book, Her Habit of Being, is a great book, consisting of a lot of letters that she wrote back and forth to all different people the last several years of her life. So it was very nice,
Yeah, and we incorporate a lot of her letters, quotations from Flannery O'Connor in our book, some of her short stories, some of her novels, just excerpts from O'Connor's to really show off her personality, who she was, and why she wrote the way she wrote. Mm-hmm. So I think, The Habit of Being is a wonderful place to begin trying to understand Flannery O'Connor. And I think our book, too, is a great introduction to who she was and why read her work and why it matters today.
Absolutely. Well, I think this is a good time. We're going to take a quick break. And then on the other side, I want to talk a little bit more about the controversial aspect of Flannery. And then we'll get into like the book itself and all that, the treasures within. So we'll be right back with more Matters of Soul Importance with Christina and Karen.
Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
Welcome back to Matters of Soul Importance. We are speaking about Flannery O'Connor today. The question on our mind is, who was Flannery O'Connor? She was a Catholic writer She lived in the Southern Bible Belt times and had quite an interesting life, a life that included a very winding journey and really ended in a lot of suffering. She was suffering from the disease of lupus, and it had taken her father when she was only just barely, not quite 16 years old. It was a very real pall over her life, knowing that her life also could be cut short. She had a real sense of purpose because of that, to make her days count. And I think that's one of the messages Christina and I and Karen and I really took from that adventure, was just realizing, live like you're dying, basically. And I know we lose sight of that in our everyday life, but I want to continue on like sharing about Flannery and also our book. So Christina, you were the one that we were in a cell in a large monastery, the Conyers Monastery, Conyers Monastery was one that Flannery actually had been at. So we were still following in her footsteps up until the very end, very last day, in a fit of giggles. And what happened there, Christina, that you said, hey, we should write a book?
Yes. By this time, basically the main pilgrimage was over. We were on our way back north and at this monastery of the Holy Spirit. And we were all kind of tired, but kind of just like letting everything settle inside of us. Like, and what is the purpose now? Like, where do we go from here? And it had been proposed to us actually before we even packed our bags up that this trip, slowly and widely taken, is a book. And that stayed with me, that idea, until the very end here in the monastery, where I was like, well, let's talk about this. Do we want to write a book about this? And we all just kind of sat down and started throwing ideas together, brainstorming. What would the chapters be? What would titles be? What would it be about? And it moved from like this travel log to a travel memoir, not just the places we were and describing them, but how did it really change our lives and the trajectory of our lives in the years that happened afterwards. And we were writing and revising for many years afterwards, as we really saw the impact that she left on us after this journey together. The graces that came from this pilgrimage too.
Yeah, I mean, 11 years is a long time, and there are many moments where we could have given up, and we probably did for points, and our lives were changing. Your life Christina was really changing, and Karen's as well. And you were moving and grandkids and all the things. But there was something that kept us tethered. There was something so important about Flannery and about how we mingled with her words and her in her world that just we couldn't let go of the idea that this was meant to be shared with others, that we didn't do this journey just to go on a friendship journey. There was something for others. And that's what we're bringing forward. And we finally found a publisher that was willing to take on 3 different authors, which is, I'm sure, a challenge. And we're going to be published by En Route Books and Media. Our book will be coming out today, the day this drops. Our cover has its own story. Christina, maybe you can mention about the cover since you're connected to it.
Sure. It was important to us that art be incorporated into the book, and also to distinguish our 3 different voices, which is another powerful aspect, I think, here is the fact that we're each from 3 different generations, and somehow God put us together on this adventure, and it's our 3 different generational perspectives that really add something to the conversation about Flannery O'Connor. So we wanted to distinguish our voices, but each be able to speak. And we did so by choosing a different bird, emblem, which is preceding our portions of the book. So there's a blue jay, there's a cardinal, and there's a canary. And we found an artist to do watercolor drawings of our birds, and also to illustrate the front cover, which is a beautiful watercolor picture of Flannery O'Connor coming out of the woods of Andalusia.
Yeah, and with our little birds there in the trees fluttering above. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So who was Flannery O'Connor? Like, is there a way to distill this down? I know that she is controversial in some ways. There's a few things, she was writing in a certain time. And I think people can take that out of context and not quite understand aspects of her, the racism issue that has been brought up in recent years. However, if you read her fiction and read the story, she really is all about uplifting those who are downtrodden. So a lot of times what it seems like, you need to read, I think the best way in is what we've said is really through her letters, because to understand Flannery's writings, you need to understand Flannery. And once you get a grasp of who she was and what was important to her, everything changes. That's not always the way it works with writers, but in my case, that is how I was able to enter into her stories. Mm-hmm. Any other comments from either of you two about any of that?
I think she was often misunderstood. I think she had a great heart, and that she wanted to, like you said, uplift others through her stories, through her faith. I think as far as, and I wasn't going to touch on this, but I will, as the racism aspect of it, I think the language that was used then, we are often judged today by what was used and appropriate many years ago, and that doesn't need to be, because you're putting words into someone else's, and thoughts into someone else's words, writing, and their personality that isn't there. So I think that if people could just get to know her through her work and through her letters, I think they would really grow to like her a lot.
Yeah. And as to, who is Flannery O'Connor, I would say it is helpful to understand. She was a storyteller who wrote with this belief that every story hinges on the action of grace in a character's life. So it's our choice if we want to accept the grace that's being handed out to us for a chance of redemption. It's offered to us freely, or do we continue in our narrow, often short-sighted ways? Or do we want to be, set free by this greater truth, by a greater vision of the world? And she had a big vision. And so to read her stories, understanding that and kind of looking for themes of vision and eyesight and redemption and grace, it does help you kind of unpack these deep short stories that she wrote in her novels.
Yeah. I want to mention one thing too. We're 3 Catholic writers. She was a Catholic writer. So obviously we were drawn to that. However, I don't think you have to be Catholic to appreciate this. In fact, a lot of English professors through the years have introduced Flannery to people because there's so many lessons there. The literary aspect, the faith aspect for anyone of any faith, really. I mean, she really wrestled with God. She wasn't a pushover when it came to faith. She didn't just accept whatever was told. She did have that grounding where she was immersed in a Catholic faith, but she was also interacting with the world, the real world, and she wasn't afraid to illuminate that and to lift it up, and she did it through stories, through colorful stories. So Christina, you were definitely the little bird flying through this adventure with dreams in your heart. I mean, that's how we kind of ended up taking this. I don't think that that Karen and I would have ended up doing it on our own. We needed someone who, maybe was a little less grounded in their life to like lure us along. So how did the trip end up affecting your post-trip life? And then Karen, I'm going to ask you the same.
Okay.
Yes. I would use the word emboldened. Flannery O'Connor and going on this trip and being in the South where she lived, all of this emboldened me as a writer, as a woman of faith too, and as someone, with many dreams on my heart and the desire to just kind of take flight. So after this pilgrimage, it was only a couple months later that I did decide to move away from my homeland of Wisconsin and go out to the West. So not the East as Flannery did, but out to the West, the Pacific Coast. And there I met my husband. A few years later, we started our family there, and it was a beautiful time of writing, of dreaming, of starting my vocation. And then also, while we were still revising this work and trying to find a publisher for it, my family and I moved back to the Midwest, which is where I grew up. It's also where my husband is from. And we went through a whole discernment of coming back to this place where we had come from. And again, Flannery O'Connor just seemed like kind of a role model to me during that time of someone who came back, and it was okay. And she made the most of it. And she actually found new discoveries in her in the South, where she grew up. So back to her roots.
And what about you, Karen, before we have to wrap it up? What did she give you? How did she change you, kind of in a nutshell?
It changed my perspective on writing and the power behind the pen. With her example, things don't always work out the way you want, but the way they should. And it helped me appreciate the life I was given. There's things in my life that are very sad, but I've learned to rise beyond that and become more forgiving of myself as a mother and as a Catholic. And despite our imperfections, most of our intentions are very good in this world. And she taught me that.
I'm excited for people to read our work and to dive in. I think it's a great introduction. I think it will point to other work of Flannery. She is meant to be known, and this is coming in the 100th year since her birth. And so we're very excited to share Finding Flannery with all of you. So more to come. Thank you, ladies, for coming back with me and joining me for this conversation to celebrate this wonderful launch of our book, Finding Flannery. We'll share in the show notes where you can get a copy. So we hope that you can do that, and have a blessed day, everyone.
Who was Flannery O'Connor? Well, for one, she was someone who tickled the funny bone. When I was reading her letters on the plane on the way to Kentucky, I couldn't stop laughing out loud, and it was a little embarrassing being in a public place like that. And now, about eternal life, heaven and hell, Flannery was deadly serious. Her characters found themselves in the predicaments they did because she wanted to warn readers what a life without grace looks like. It should unsettle us and make us squirm. It should make us want to change, to look at ourselves and our lives more honestly and with plenty of scrutiny. Otherwise, we're stuck in a flat existence that will, if we're not paying attention, bring us straight to, well, hell. And what is hell in the end? Life without God, without love, without mercy. Flannery may have started out living a vanilla life, or so it might have seemed to some, but in reality she was forced early to consider life's harsh brevity and what it will demand of us. She once famously said, "What people don't realize is how much religion costs. They think faith is a big electric blanket, when of course it is the cross." There are no shortcuts to avoid suffering, and Flannery knew it. She knew down to her bones that life would require us to suffer, but it also could bring us, through faith, to opening ourselves more fully to love. Flannery also once said the following, which helps explain why her stories were, at times, so violent. Quote, "When you can assume that your audience holds the same beliefs you do, you can relax and use more normal means of talking to it. When you have to assume that it does not, then you have to make your vision apparent by shock. To the hard of hearing, you shout, and for the almost blind, you draw large and startling figures." My co-authors shared a bit about how Flannery had changed them. What she left me most of all was courage. When I first started reading her, I was just beginning to find out how much talking about faith publicly was going to cost me. But I noticed how Flannery had handled it all, with so much grace, honesty, and a willingness to be disliked, if it meant holding to her convictions. If not for Flannery, I'd likely not be half as brave as I'd been in this season of my life, whether in writing for a daily newspaper about faith or standing on the sidewalk of our area's only abortion facility to help draw out hope. Flannery was not afraid to discuss topics of both earthly and eternal consequence, and to her, the gospel wasn't mere words. It was a way of being, a habit of being. It was a joy to me to have my two co-authors and fellow Catholic writer friends on Matters of Soul Importance today to answer who was Flannery O'Connor. We seek to be a bridge for those who know little about her, to encourage readers of our book to become readers of Flannery's works. The brevity of Flannery O'Connor's life meant that her imprint has become somewhat faded over time, but she has so much still to teach us about what it means to be human, about the importance of relationship, about not bending to a culture that insists on death as the answer. As of today, you can order Finding Flannery at En Route Books and Media, Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or request it from your library or favorite bookstore. This is an exciting day for us, and we're pleased to have you here for the celebration. I'm going to close today with a short excerpt from Flannery herself, a recording from a reading she gave of her short story, A Good Man is Hard to Find, at Vanderbilt University in April of 1959. So do stay a few moments longer to hear her lovely Southern accent before you skedaddle for the day. In our next episode, we'll visit with another Wisconsinite who will answer the question, what is Advent and why should I care? Until then, don't lose sight of the light.
The name of this is A Good Man is Hard to Find. The grandmother didn't want to go to Florida. She wanted to visit some of her connections in East Tennessee, and she was seizing at every chance to change Bailey's mind. Bailey was the son she lived with, her only boy. He was sitting on the edge of his chair at the table, bent over the orange sports section of the journal. "Now look here, Bailey," she said. "See here, read this." And she stood with one hand on her thin hip and the other rattling the newspaper at his bald head. "Here, this fellow that calls himself the Misfit is loose from the federal pen and headed toward Florida. And you read here what it says he did to these people. Just you read it. I wouldn't take my children in any direction with a criminal like that loose in it. I couldn't answer to my conscience if I did." Bailey didn't look up from his reading, so she wheeled around then toward the children's mother, a young woman in slacks, whose face was as broad and innocent as a cabbage, and was tied around with a green head kerchief that had 2 points on top, like rabbit's ears. She was sitting on the sofa feeding the baby his apricots out of a jar. The children had been to Florida before, the old lady said. You all ought to take them somewhere else for a change so they would see different parts of the world and be broad. They never have been to East Tennessee. The children's mother didn't seem to hear her, but the 8-year-old boy, John Wesley, a stocky child with glasses, said, "If you don't want to go to Florida, why don't you stay at home?" He and the little girl, June Starr, were reading the funny papers on the floor. She wouldn't stay at home to be queen for a day, June Starr said, without raising her yellow head. "Yes, and what would you do if this fellow the misfit caught you?" the grandmother asked. "I'd smack his face," John Wesley said. "She wouldn't stay at home for $1 million, June Starr said, afraid she'd miss something. She has to go everywhere we go." "All right, miss," the grandmother said. "Just remember that the next time you want me to curl your hair." June Starr said her hair was naturally curly. The next morning, the grandmother was the first one in the car, ready to go. She had her big black valise that looked like the head of a hippopotamus in one corner, and underneath it she was hiding a basket with Pitty Sing, the cat, in it. She didn't intend for the cat to be left alone in the house for 3 days, because he would miss her too much, and she was afraid he might brush against one of the gas burners and accidentally asphyxiate himself. Her son Bailey didn't like to arrive at a motel with a cat. She sat in the middle of the back seat with John Wesley and June Starr on either side of her. Bailey and the children's mother and the baby sat in front, and they left Atlanta at 8:45 with the mileage on the car at 55890. The grandmother wrote this down because she thought it would be interesting to say how many miles they had been when they got back. It took them 20 minutes to reach the outskirts of the city. The old lady settled herself comfortably, removing her white cotton gloves and putting them up with her purse on the shelf in front of the back window. The children's mother still had on slacks and still had her head tied up in a green kerchief, but the grandmother had on a navy blue straw sailor hat with a bunch of white violets on the brim and a navy blue dress with a small white dot in the print. Her collars and cuffs were white organdy trimmed with lace, and at her neckline she had pinned a purple spray of cloth violets containing a sachet. In case of an accident, anyone seeing her dead on the highway would know at once that she was a lady. She said she thought it was going to be a good day for driving, neither too hot nor too cold. And she cautioned Bailey that the speed limit was 55 miles an hour, and that the patrolmen hid themselves behind billboards and small clumps of trees and sped out after you before you had a chance to slow down.